I am so thankful that the new digital SAT does not have long, complicated passages. The passages might still be complicated, but they are at least shorter. And just like with the old SAT, we're going to need to make sure we understand the question before we really dive in here. So it says, which choice best describes the function of the second sentence in the overall structure of the text? So we're focusing on the second sentence, but obviously we need to read everything. And luckily, though, it's not much to read. So second sentence is important, but we want to say, like, okay, how does it function with everything else going on? So I'm really trying to think what we're leading kind of like into and how we're exiting that second sentence. Astronomers are confident that the star Betelgeuse will eventually consume all the helium in its core and explode in a supernova. They are much less confident. Okay, that's probably important. There's a contrast here. However, about when this will happen, since that depends on internal characteristics of Betelgeuse that are largely unknown. So two things in that sentence repeat the same idea. We don't know stuff. We're not confident in it. We don't know it. So that's a very clear, like, hey, that's probably important. Let's keep reading. Astrophysicist Serafina El-Badri-Nance and colleagues recently investigated whether acoustic waves in the star could be used to determine internal stellar states, but concluded that this method could not sufficiently reveal Betelgeuse's internal characteristics to allow its evolutionary state to be firmly fixed. Meaning, all these sentences kind of, or at least sentence 2 and the last part, kind of match up, right? We're confident in something, but then we're not confident in when this will happen. And then they did some sort of experiment and kind of reaffirmed this. So, right, they could not sufficiently reveal. So this kind of reinforces what was said in sentence 2. So maybe even that's a lot more analysis than you would need here. You might be able to just go right to the answer choices, but let's make sure we keep in mind this confidence thing. This was obviously an important point, a main idea. So my dumb summary is we're somehow talking about the confidence in the data or the knowledge. Choice A, it explains how the work of Nance and colleagues were received by others in the field. Well, this is obviously wrong. They never talk about other people in the field, so we don't know. Gone. It presents the central finding reported by Nance and colleagues. Well, okay, maybe. It does seem to suggest, or set them up for what we're going to talk about, so I'll leave that for now. C identifies the problem that Nance and colleagues attempted to solve but did not. Well, they clearly did attempt to solve something and failed at it, and I guess it has to do with understanding things, so maybe this also is a valid answer, so we'll leave this one too. D, it describes a serious limitation of the method used by Nance and colleagues. This is an important word, method, right? The method in a scientific experiment is like, what are the steps that you take to collect your data, to study whatever you're studying? So we don't really get anything about that, right? They're investigating the acoustic waves. I have no idea how they did that, so I don't know about their method. I have like a very rough sense of what their experiment was, but I don't know the method they used to measure these waves, so I can't talk about this. This is just not part of it. And they're not criticizing the method. They're just saying, well, we couldn't find anything using this method. So it doesn't mean the method itself was bad. It's just sometimes we try stuff that is scientifically sound and, we don't learn anything. It just happens. Now, between B and C, we're going to need to use some old-fashioned SAT ideas. Strong words are bad, strong ideas, big statements are bad, and weaker, more bland statements are better. So if we compare them, choice B is pretty strong. It presents the central finding reported by Nance and colleagues. Well, what was their central finding? That the interstellar states could not be determined by their experiment. So that's very specific. They're using the waves, I guess, but the underlined sentence is much more general, right? It's just saying we're not confident in what's going to happen to Betelgeuse. It's not saying specifically what we don't know, why we're not confident. It's just a general statement. So we're not really getting the central finding of these people. We're kind of getting the setup for why they did their experiment in the first place. They did it because we don't know anything about or enough about this star. So let's do an experiment to learn more. Unfortunately, the experiment doesn't work, but we at least tried to solve this problem. So C is better. And it does make more sense with kind of just like the normal chronology of how you would think about this, right? Like, here's the problem, here's what they did to try to solve it, didn't work. Rather than why would we introduce the central finding, the central claim of this study before we've introduced the study? That's unusual. So C just makes more sense. We definitely need to understand the scientific process, though, to get these kinds of questions. So even though the passage is short, it gets across a lot of ideas about science. So there's a density here you got to be able to look through.